I would also like to say that people these days have started, I mean, they read, there are people who have become Buddhist and they claim to be Buddhist, and also they claim to be reader of various things. And uh, but but I'm sorry to say that we fail to produce scholars. If you see, at least in the state of Maharashtra, if you see, the moment Dr. Ambedkar embraces Buddhism, the Brahmins in Maharashtra stopped working on Buddhism or writing on Buddhism. That's a very significant departure we get. Otherwise, we get a lot of scholars writing on Buddhism in early Buddhism till 1956. And post 1956, you hardly find any. So this becomes a shift, and the responsibility really passes on to the community who have become Buddhist. But at the same time, those who have become Buddhist, it no doubt it becomes their responsibility. But at the same time, I must say that in a recent time, what one notices is that there is a mushrooming of people who claim to be scholars on WhatsApp and Facebook, and they don't mind writing any damn thing without cross-examining everything, or for that matter, without getting into the efficacies of what they write, or for that matter, whether such kind of a trend of writing really helps you to go take the scholarship forward. This is a very fundamental thing, and unless and until you realize and understand this particular aspect, I don't think establishing any university by anybody for that matter will not going to help unless until you critically engage yourself not only in the area but also in the respective field of specializations, as well as the nuances and the criticality that a particular philosophical tradition offers. Just for example, the there is some message that I'm not audible. I can't see the speed. My image is not coming on the screen. So I request the moderator to do the needful.
We can see you very clearly. I think the
Okay,
internet
fine.
of
Can
the
it
was.
do it in the main this thing so that it comes?
Yeah.
So uh, uh, so what one notices is that there are these fundamental issues which people don't try to understand and make statements, unnecessary statements. Or even for that matter, there are claims, there are a number of claims where even the books have been written on a very superficial readings and knowledge. And for that matter, the the ways in which this kind of a superficiality becomes an operative tool to impose one's hegemony, and also trying to assert a kind of a control which is completely antithetical to the Buddhist tradition and the Buddhist philosophy. Now, having said that, I would like to state one simple thing, that when in 1935-36, when Baba Sahib writes Annihilation of Caste, so there he makes it very clear that nothing is permanent, everything is changing. Now he goes on the same thing, same statement, writing the same statement, even when he delivers a speech on Buddha or Karl Marx. And there also he makes it very clear that nothing is permanent, everything is changing. I'm not reading out the entire quotation because otherwise it will take time. So I'm just summarizing it. And he further says that, I mean, nothing is permanent, everything is changing. But he further adds that being is becoming. Now, this whole aspect of being is becoming, or being, how you understand this whole aspect of being is becoming. Now, the second point I wish to submit is that the very nomenclature of Navayana, which is being claimed today, and it is the American academic world which has started using this nomenclature extensively, despite the fact that the people who were converted to Buddhism never ever accepted it as Navayana, or they always had this inhibition to accept that particular term. It is, I mean, there is a history to it, because the uh, this journalist during that time had asked Dr. Ambedkar, what kind of a Buddhism you are going for? Is it Mahayan, Hinayan, or Tantrayan, or Vajrayan, or Tibetan Buddhism, or whatever it is? And Dr. Ambedkar replied very candidly. He said, well, nothing of that sort. You can call it Navayan. तुम्हाला जर वाटत असेल तर तुम्ही त्याला नवयान म्हणू शकता. This is a precise statement of Dr. Ambedkar, and he said it in Marathi. And then in the next day, it was all published in the newspaper. So this is how the term Navayana enters in the domain. But what is important here is how do you understand these epistemic means, and whether the Buddhist philosophy has a capacity to interrogate the contemporary phenomenon as well as the interpretative logic which are being practiced these days. We are so much bombarded by the Western methodologies and the philosophical tradition of postmodernism, say for example. Now, are they really going to be very useful tool? And how do we really understand? Without getting engaged with the contemporary, I don't think that we can really establish anything which will have a influence and impacting factor in the entire logic of interpretative world. The entire interpretative world is being dominated by the Europeans and Americans. Charles Mill, the well-known philosopher Charles Mill, who recently died, he called it as white ignorance, because according to him, the entire philosophical tradition always talks about the Plato, Aristotle, and the entire gamut of Kant and all those things, but it will not speak anything which is non-European, and this he finds it hugely problematic. And therefore, you have to understand how the controls are being exercised and whether you are capable of creating a critique or initiating a critique of those well-known figures. Just to give you a small example, Dr. Ambedkar writes on Russell. Russell was a top philosopher of that time. Russell and his critique. And it was an essay which he wrote as a part of his philosophy course in Columbia, which he was doing under John Dewey. Russell was a friend to John Dewey, and both were contemporary. And when Bertrand Russell writes History of Western Philosophy, that time he just see what he writes about John Dewey. And he says that I would like to reserve my observations and comments and so on and so forth. So one can see what kind of a dialogues were happening during that time, and how Dr. Ambedkar was also witness and had a deeper understanding of the complications or the intricacies that were involved in the philosophical traditions. And when Dr. Ambedkar writes Riddle in Hinduism, he makes it very clear that the Western world cannot merely claim that they have been the most democratic. Rather, the Indians have their traditions, and they can excavate that in their philosophical traditions. And therefore, he divides the philosophy into three, the Indian philosophy into three streams, into three, not streams, but rather the three phases of development. That is what he does. Now, interestingly, when Ananda Kausalyan wrote his book called Darshan Ved Se Marg Tak, that time he makes a very fundamental statement. He says that how do you really identify this whole the whole logic of the Buddhist community or Buddhist sect? And he sets forth the four criteria, and that criteria is very interesting. And that criteria says that um, uh, uh, the first criteria, he says that no Buddhist, I mean, he wrote it in Hindi, I'm translating in English. No Buddhist sect can believe in divinity. Second, no Buddhist sect can believe in existence of soul. Third, no Buddhist sect can believe blindly in the mere reading of the text, or the keval path karna is not a Buddhist. So that means the ritualistic tradition which a person follows absolutely has no meaning unless until it is backed by your moral and ethical principles and the practices. It is very clear. And then the fourth criteria, he says that no Buddhist sect can deny the theory of Pratyuta Samutpad. So this Pratyuta Samutpad becomes very important means in order to interrogate the entire practices of the philosophical traditions. Now, there are a number of scholars in the Western world, fantastic Buddhist scholars, who have gone into the history of Buddhist philosophy. Or for that matter, if you go and converse in the Tibetan Institute, they will explain you what exactly Nagarjuna means, or this thing and that thing, or what the other people have said. And because the Tibetans have also produced commentaries on Dharmakirti or Dignag and all this, and Chandrakirti and all these people. So they will tell you, but they will not be able to tell you as to how you can apply your understanding in order to interrogate the present phenomenon, or for that matter, the interpretative logic. This becomes very important. Now, say for example, when Dr. Ambedkar writes Annihilation of Caste, there is a fantastic framework he advocates, that is rules and principles. I'm sorry to say, I have not seen Indian scholars, or for that matter, even the claimed Ambedkarite academicians, using that framework to make an analysis of the politics, society, and the behavior. Or even for that matter, when Dr. Ambedkar writes that it is that Varna is a perversion, nobody has really gone into these psychological dimensions, and that is precisely the reason that why I say that caste is a psychotic perversion. So these perversions, you need to understand, you need to analyze these perversions. It is not simply that you have to achieve the goal of a Nibbana and all those things. It is there for the bhikshus to do that if they wish to have a monastic establishment, and that becomes their pursuit. But that does not mean that they will not read, they will not understand. Realization of Pratyuta Samutpad is very important, and that is why Buddha says to Ananda, no, it is a very sukhad, that it is a happy moment. The realization of the Pratyuta Samutpad is a happy moment, that it is a sukhad anubhav. It's very categorical in these kind of discourses. So whether you begin from the Dighanika and then you go on to the Abhidhamma Pitak, and then so on and so forth, how the philosophical tradition develops, or for that matter, how Nagarjuna interrogates, because he divides Pratyuta Samutpad into two components. One is a cause, and second is a momentariness. So there is this division, and it is this momentariness which goes into the extremities, and that creates number of metaphysical elements in the Buddhist practices and philosophies. And this is where there is this realization, because the what Diganath does is that he brings back from that metaphysical to the earthy realms, or the realities of life. So you have to understand this. If you don't really understand why it happened and how it happened, and how people, there is this reassertions of these claims, then I'm sorry to say you will never able to understand the critical interrogations. And these critical interrogations are very important. And when you read the word like vijnana in a Buddhist text, in mainly the Pali text, and then it also gets used in the Sanskrit Buddhist text. Now, when you find the word vijnana, that does not mean it is a science in those texts. It basically means chitta and man. So you have to understand the very context of this word vijnana, and then how the term alaya vijnana gets advocated by likes of Vasubandhu. Or even for that matter, in order to explain Shunyata, Babasaheb Ambedkar does not quote Nagarjuna, because he knows how those extremities have produced certain philosophies which have been highly metaphysical, and therefore they therefore become irrelevant. And then he quotes Digna in order to explain Shunyata. So one has to understand as to how these particular philosophical dimensions become very important. Now, person like Dharmakirti, you know, uh, who has been a towering figure in the Buddhist philosophical tradition. So there are a number of concepts he advocates, such as Prayoga Bheda, Prayoja Sambandha, Shabdamay, Arthamay. Then you have a Prayojaniya Artha. Then you have Hetu Sambandha, you have a Hetu Dharma, then you have a Hetu Svabhava, then you have Swarthanuman and Paramarthanuman, and then you also have a Hetu Bindu. These are very important philosophical tools which Dharmakirti advocates. But has any philosopher in the contemporary world really tried to understand and makes a critique of Foucault? Say, for example, this is how you have to understand. See, Buddhist philosophy was the first philosophy and remains the only philosophy in the world which denied the idea of presupposition. Even Kant believed in presupposition. The first critique of Kant in India was produced by what's his name? The one who wrote Darshan Digdarshan, Rahul Sanskritayan.
Rahul Sanskritayan.
So the Rahul Sanskritayan was the first one to produce a critique of Kant. Just imagine, and on what logic he produces that critique of Kant. It is basically he uses the Buddhist logic, and that is why he could able to. I mean, it became a kind of an enabling process for him to see the problems in Kant's theory. Or for that matter, beautiful reading of Kant has been produced by, and very critical reading of Kant has been produced by likes of Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak in that book, Post-Colonial Reason. And she makes it very clear that Kant denies that emancipation to the subalterns. It is very categorical. She produced such a fantastic critique of reading of Kant. Now, coming to the contemporary to more contemporary these things, we need to understand how these epistemic means can be used, and therefore, Dharmakirti, I mean, there is a fantastic quote by Satkari Mukherjee when he writes his book on Buddhist philosophy, and he says that perception, according to Dharmakirti, consists in the apprehension of an object in its own specific character, that is Swalakshana. So that is what I said about the Swalakshana. Having nothing in common with other objects similar or dissimilar, and is thus completely free from association with names and verbal expressions, an association which presupposes and is made possible by relational thought. That is how the idea of perception gets analyzed by Dharmakirti, and how it is so much embedded in this whole aspect of Pratita Samutta. Now, when I said that it denies that presupposition, and so when Buddhist philosophy denies the presupposition, so certainly presuppositions have no place in the Buddhist tradition. And in a similar way, postmodern philosophy denies the presupposition. Just imagine it took so much of time for European thinking process to come to 21st century or early 20th century in accepting denial of the presuppositions. Till then, the presuppositions get very much accepted in their every sphere of life. And this particular aspect of enlightenment should be critiqued. So though today Sri Lanka is facing tremendous food crisis. You won't believe the price of a sugar in Sri Lanka is Sri Lankan 450 rupees. Price of a milk powder in Sri Lanka is whopping some 600, 700 rupees. That small powder bottle for 1 kg. It is such a big crisis in Sri Lanka. Where is your Buddhist logic getting followed? You are a discriminatory society. You are not an egalitarian society. And what sciences you have developed? If you claim that you are a Buddhist society, or you wish to claim that kind of a rationality, then why the rationality does not get followed in every sphere of life, including your sphere of politics as well as the sciences? The modern sciences have challenged the religion, though there is a fantastic correlation between Einstein's theory and what Nagarjuna talks about the momentariness. There is no doubt about that. But did those theories really produce scientific experiments and really have been part of the welfare of the society? This is a fundamental question which one has to raise, whether it is for the welfare of the society or not. And then how you nurture ignorances? By doing certain practices without cross-examining. So you accept it very blindly. And why you accept it very blindly? So that shows that you are an ignorant society, that you are full of ignorances. Avidya, that is what the word which is used in the Buddhist philosophy. Now, and that is the reason, like I formulated the conceptual framework of protected ignorance. Now this is a very I mean, I don't claim that I have done anything new, but because I always say, I always maintain that it is based on the Buddha's theory of Pratita Samutta. Because if your objective is not to ward off ignorances in the knowledge production process, then certainly it becomes a protected ignorance. That means what you are producing is all about creating a body of a knowledge which will keep you ignorant forever. How? See, you have to understand this logic of a minority voice becoming a majority voice in the Indian political and social sphere. Same is the case with the European society, how a certain minority voice becomes a majority voice. and this gets applicable everywhere. And this everyday sphere somehow gets so much ghettoized that you do not see the problems and the and the intricacies uh, um, involved in it. Now, objective formulations in this regard, one has to see, and it is essentially related with mental constructs and also embedded in your cultural construct. Now, both the things are not divided, both the things are not separated. They are very much part and parcel. They are rather integrated one, they are rather embedded one. Both are codependent, both are interdependent. This is how you have to apply the theory of Pratitya Samutpad in order to present a criticality and how you produce that kind of a criticality. Now, to illustrate, one of the one example, say for example, Derrida. He says that there is no fixity of meaning to the signifier, and I accept that logic. Yes, no doubt. But how do you produce a critique of Derrida then on this logic? What I have said always is that, and I have written on it also, that the fixity, no doubt that there is no fixity of meaning, even if we accept that logic, but it depends on the subjective position of the signifier through which we derive a meaning. That is where you have to apply, and that is where you have to understand this particular one. When the uh, uh, likes of Foucault, I mean, he analyzes many of things, and he also analyzes the consciousness, how consciousness is evolved as a part of historical reconstruction, and how truth is constructed. And interestingly, Foucault discusses latent structure of knowledge as episteme. That is, group of assumptions, prejudices, and mindset that structure thought of any particular epoch. And what I find is that episteme is embedded within. However, it also becomes part of the problematics as to how do we subscribe to such phenomena. And therefore, I have preferred to use the term normative. So I have deviated from Foucault. I call it normative. It cannot be episteme, because epistemes have certain rational principles, whereas normatives do not carry those rational principles. It is like गधे की चाल, like एक बंदा उधर जाता है तो उसके पीछे तुम भी जा. This is the way people function. This is the way society functions, and this is the way even your thinking ability functions. So this gadhe ki bhed chal, how do you call it as episteme? I call this gadhe ki bhed chal as normative, and there are number of these normatives you are living with. It is very much embedded factor in your life. Do you examine your ideas of consciousness through this following of the normatives? And then how your sensorial world gets constructed through this normative. And this sensorial world, when gets constructed through this normative, it comes through what kind of a consciousness you have. And therefore you have to see that how you make these interrogations. So often it is argued that the process of interrogative or epistemic thinking is transcendental. हर कोई बैठता है और ट्रांसेंडेंटल हो जाता है. I mean, I'll just give you one good example. Like I always say, Guru becomes transcendental, and therefore it is of no use to me. It's as simple as this. So any philosopher becoming transcendental, that is nonsense. Because transcendental is what? And that is the beyond normal human experience. What is beyond normal human experience? Your beyond normal human experience is nothing but your neurological your neurological structure that produces certain thought process through your consciousness, which has absolutely not linked with your everyday life, but rather it is your wishful thinking to go into this whole idea of अद्भुत, आहा परे है, ये है, वो है. And this is exactly a game played by these babas and buas. So how do you analyze these babas and buas? Through these conceptual formulations. So one has to see, you cannot analyze babas and buas through Foucault. As simple as this. You cannot analyze babas and buas through Deleuze, through mere Deleuze. So this this interrogative or epistemic thinking becomes transcendental. It goes beyond human experience of experience, knowledge, reason, understanding, and everything, whether it is in religious ways or it is in a spiritual ways. And therefore, one has to see whether how do you classify this ontology, because ontology is all about nature of being or metaphysics of nature of being. So the nature of being or metaphysics of nature of being is also a normative, because you have not broken that normative and you are entering into with those kind of thought process, and therefore your perception and understanding produce such a phenomenon that is not really helpful in reconstructing the human mind and also creating any kind of an enabling process. Because the nature of consciousness of being is a shifting mental space. It is not to do with your shifting physical space, but it is to do more with your shifting mental spaces. And normative being problematic tendency not to rethink on any action or inhumanness, because whatever inhumannesses are happening or inflicted on the society, that you call it as normative. Say for example, ye chuda ja raha hai, are marya challa. These are normatives. These are very important. Why people use this kind of an abusive language? That this abusive language becomes part of their normative, and therefore whenever any atrocity happens, so they always are ye to hota hi hai yaar. They don't feel pinched, but ye to hota hi hai yaar. These are the normatives. So you don't rethink the nature of inhumanness, because you always believe in those normatives. And also the behavioral thinking that produce specific forms of signifiers, and these signifiers are structured within the consciousness of your cultural realms, and these they produce a certain signification process within specific thinking and controls the thinking accordingly. So how these specificities are within, they are very much part and parcel of your own self. Now uh, 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 now this kind of a process, does it have any standard that is marked by, I mean, this becomes a kind of a shared accepted standard. okay, by the communities in India or anywhere in the world, whether it is Taliban, whether it is Europe or anywhere in the world, these kind of a shared, accepted, shared standard, they are marked by violence, perversions, and psychosis. So the reason of this psychosis, the reasons of being psychosis, the reasons of being perverted mind, the perversions, the violence, is to do with your this so-called shared accepted standards that gets practiced in your everyday life. So now coming back to presuppositions as accepted means of understanding and being part of knowledge formation process. And this has been always understood as a singular entity which is operating the meaning process. And when the postmodern philosophy comes, so this singular meaning process gets completely dismantled. So there is no single reading. There is no that uh, um, uh, that 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 uh, that only a particular reading kind of an exists in the text, but rather there is there as Derrida would like to say, the death of author and the death of author, or there is always like we art historians have always said that there is a death of an artist and birth of a spectator. So one has to understand these. I mean, you cannot see those things in terms of binaries. The binaries are deliberately being created. Say, for example, in India, communalism is a binary which have been advocated and being created all the time. Whereas the caste violence does not become a binary. So you see the bogus nature of the secularists in India, how they analyze the violence in the Indian society. So it is very interesting to observe that consciousness of a kind becomes a choice. See, the consciousness of the consciousness of a kind, certain kind of a consciousness becomes a choice that gets turned into universal process without dismantling the field of normatives. And hence, cognition and sensory perception is directed to safeguard the interest of the self. These are the different ways of interrogative process. Now, how you really legitimize this self, that is also very important. And everybody tries to legitimize the self. And these days, WhatsApp has become such a fabulous example to see how people have this tendency of legitimizing self. So I as a self, I as a self, and I as the only I who has a power and knowledge to teach others. Or even for that matter, like whenever there is some discussion, we always say, देखो मैंने उसको दे दिया. I mean, these are the kind of a terminologies we use. नाही नाही मी त्याला झोडलं चांगलं. I mean, see the kind of a words we use in our everyday life. These are very day-to-day examples. So my question again is that, can transcendental then be considered as reflective upon the self? And how then the prejudiced self-reflections can bear the capacity to be of being conscious? So to be of being conscious certainly has to be unprejudiced. But then you have a prejudiced mind, and therefore how can you claim of that consciousness of being? And this is and this being conscious is an experiential realm. It is to do with your everyday experiences. It is to do with your thinking. It is to do with your behavior with others. It is to do with your everyday practices and how you conduct yourself. And say for example, when I was talking on recent that self account which has been written by Sharad Baviskar, titled as Bhura. It's a fantastic book he has produced about the self. And in every page, you will understand that, I mean, it is not a mere retrospection. See, retrospection is a process where you recall all the incidents in your life. But introspection is a process where you interrogate what really happened and it was good or bad, and to which side you wish to be. Lot of people, they remember, they recall this, but they won't do introspection. They fail to do introspection. Or even for that matter, even Homi Bhabha himself failed to do bloody any kind of an introspection. His own community very much followed untouchability. Are they part and parcel of the democratic process of equality? Every time you wish to have equality, or you wish to protect your rights and this whole idea of freedom of expression and everything, freedom of creativity and all. But do you stand for the inhuman behavior that is inflicted by the caste Hinduness? No, you don't stand. Rather, you would like to eulogize Gandhi. Every time Gandhi gets reinscribed by these kind of writers, whether it is Leela Gandhi or it is Akhil Bilgrami, or for that matter Swaraj Paul and all, Meghna Desai and all these people. Now, if you see very clearly, likes of Gandhi, Tagore, then Radhakrishnan, then Arbindo Ghosh, Vivekanand. See, these were all Vedantics. And the Vedantics have not produced the structure of equality. That has been a historical record. And none of these people really attempted to create any kind of a structure of equality, even in their epistemic terms. So their epistemic, there is this epistemic violence, which is all the time getting overplayed or getting played and overplayed and consciously being played by the Vedantics in India. I call likes of Sundar Sarukai as a fantastic example of Vedantic par excellence under the garb of postmodernism. He may not like that term, or for that matter, Guru may not like that term for his own friend, but it is the fact. And I can prove that so easily. I can easily interrogate that. The reflective realization which Guru talks about is so much ghettoized, whereas Ambedkar's reflective realization is not ghettoized. So how do you really try to understand the creation or making anything that becomes an enabling process? So if any university system does not create that enabling process, that means that university is good for nothing, be it any university in the world, because it is not creating any enabling process. Your knowledge production process, your teaching methodologies, your very ideas are not getting rooted in order to go for the transformation of society. And transformation does not happen in one go. And at the same time, if you are transformed, that does not mean like you don't have any problems. Every world, whether it is developed world, whether it is underdeveloped world, whether it is developing world, they do have their own sorrows. The scientists have that desire to create a gadget so that it becomes useful means, which is so handy in the form of mobile and all those things, which were essentially military technologies, and these military technologies are being used in the civilian domain. So the military technologies has always been all about surveillance, and therefore you will notice that the gadgets which are being produced out of those technologies also have the aspect of surveillance and the data and everything. And that is why you talk about this data security, data this thing and data that thing. And then you produce a supercomputer which can read within seconds some lakhs of data. And that is how the speed of the processor gets calculated. And that is how you always think on those lines. So your algorithm becomes very important means in order to dissect that. The ways in which Gita is being read and presented, having that kind of an algorithm. Has anybody really tried to read that Buddhist text and try to see if that can you really have that kind of an algorithm in this Buddhist text? I've not seen those kind of researches. I'm sorry. See, I come from a different discipline. I can talk about my own discipline. My own discipline is full of prejudices, full of normatives. Art history has not produced any philosophy, let me tell you. Rather, they have always been dependent on philosophy. So there is no question of creating any philosophical means through art history. And that is why I give art historical examples in order to produce certain concepts, certain formulations which I've been working with. But it is a philosophy that produce those kind of concepts. It is not art history or any other things that produce these kind of concepts. And therefore, you need to understand that how this consciousness of being you can really becomes becomes important. And then the delusion, I think I'm exceeding my time. How much time do I have?
No, we don't worry about time. We are listening to you. We have only 2 sessions in the morning, so
Okay, fine.
no worries about time.
So what is how do you really place those things? You know. So while under the I already talked about Deleuze and that how that pure ideational event, that is where that being and becoming is gets explained through the series of events in the Deleuzian terms. So he says that it has a three dimensions. And what are those three dimensions? So one is a state of affairs the propositions denote. Then the second is the experiences or mental activities, that is belief, skills, beliefs, your desires, then whatever you try to represent, and then the third is a universal or general concept. So these are the three important uh, aspects that are associated with this whole ideational event. Now, while understanding sensorial world, you have to see that experience of mental activity constitutes a major process. It is through your mental activities you conduct yourself. So certainly I'm not going to, it has that baggage of the ways in which consciousness gets analyzed, even by likes of Vasubandhu in Abhidharma Kosha Sangraha Sutra. And these become important epistemic means to understand the sensory world, the experiences of mental activity, which constitutes a major process. Now, experiences are varied in nature. You have multiple experiences. And they keep advancing as well as growing. So your experiences becomes a baggage. You learn, you try to understand, then move further, then again try to understand, try to learn, then again you move forward. So it is always a continuous process. And this is what exactly is all about this whole the momentariness in the Buddhist logic. So sensorial world, it also creates a comfort to choose a set of signifiers to in order to produce what is set as a desired goal. So what are your desired goals? What kind of a say goal you set yourself, or you what are the objectives you have, what are the achievements you wish to have. I mean, what kind of a things you set before oneself. So practice of expressive articulations is one such activity. When you articulate something, so you also make practices of those kind of things. And this gets evolved. This practice of of articulations also gets evolved. And this gets evolved despite the fact that there is always a repetition. So you argue, and then again you repeat, and again you argue, and again you move on. So there are those repetitions. And that repetition becomes normative. So that is how, like, अरे क्या यार, वो तो ऐसा लिखता है, एक बार लिख दिया, बस वही 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 चलते रहता है. So these are very very small examples. So mental formulations are always guided by the perceptual sensorial sensations to create an enabling process, to shape a particular visual sensation, or to shape your understanding through the sensorial world. So your understanding, if has baggage of normative, then certainly your understanding will never be a samyak understanding, will never be a reasonable understanding, will not be a rational understanding. And of course, the philosophers have always argued that rationality is always relative. And I always accept that argument. Yes, rationality is always relative. But I go further and say that rationality is no doubt is relative, but its relativeness depends on its objective. If your objective is to ward off ignorances, it becomes a righteous rationality. It becomes a samyak rationality. But if your objective is not to ward off ignorances, to maintain ignorances, to protect those ignorances, then it becomes a protected ignorance. It is as simple as this. So this whole idea of rational, being rational, how do you understand that being rational? Your understanding of being rational can only be perceived through the kind of a criteria or a goal which you set forth, or the parameters which you always formulate. Otherwise, Vedantics would have also become part of the Pratita Samutpad, but they are not part of the Pratita Samutpad. It is as simple as this. So these are very important important issues. And therefore this whole logic of episteme becomes highly problematic in the Foucauldian paradigm. And one also has to see how you interrogate public sphere then. The public sphere does not have any kind of a reflective realization. Why it does not have that reflective realization? Say, for example, when you go to West, and suppose in Europe or America, you want to meet some teacher, some professor, unless until you have an appointment, you will not be able to meet him. As simple as this. He will simply say, no, I'm sorry, I don't have time for you. That is what he replies. But we don't give that kind of a reply. Or even if our students come, we don't say that kind of a things. Or even somebody calls us, we don't say, you please don't call, I don't have a time for you. We do listen to them, but they don't listen everyone. That shows that how your attitudinal hegemony, I would like to term it as attitudinal hegemony, that becomes your operative principle. And therefore, you formulate this rule that you don't have any appointment time with me, and therefore I will not meet. One can understand in the administrative terms, in the administrative position, that a secretary or a mantri is so much busy with the day-to-day administrative work that he cannot carve out a time to meet you. But he will say, fine, you come at this hours or at that hour or this day or that day. But this university professor will not say, you come tomorrow, I'm free, or evening, let's say I can carve out some time for you. No, he doesn't say that. Why he does not say that? Even a president of America will not use this kind of a language. But a university professor will use this kind of a language, I don't have a time for you. Why? It is because of the attitudinal hegemony that comes from your normative. It becomes part of your rules and principles. So, so whether when it comes to the disciplinary practices, whether it is sociology, whether it is political science, whether it is social work, whether it is any other social sciences, or for that matter, physics, chemistry, biology, and everything, every subject has its own importance. But that importance does not mean that you should bypass one and prefer another. Say, for example, the ways in which humanities are being treated by the present government, and the ways in which only certain preferential studies are being advocated by the present regime, absolutely antithetical to any kind of a university system or knowledge producing institutions. So, say for example, in Nalanda, it is not only Buddhist things were being taught. There was a study of religion. There was a study of mathematics. There was a study of so many things. And that is why Nalanda became Nalanda. You don't have any institution in the world map which can really, compare Nalanda. The philosophical debate which happened between the Buddhist and the Nyaya Vaisheshika is a fantastic debate. You even do not have that kind of a debate within your postmodernist thinking. Why it is so? Because the postmodernist thinking is also getting ghettoized, and there are number of derivations. So the derivation does not produce a key, or for that matter, the derivation does not produce anything new, but rather it goes into the drain of caged thinking. I'm using this term, drain of caged thinking. And it is because of that kind of a kuda in the mind, you never become, or you never try to interrogate, because you accept everything as Shabda Pramanya. The logic of Shabda Pramanya gets completely rejected by Buddha. And the same thing happens in the Buddhist philosophical tradition. But the logic of Shabda Pramanya in the subsequent time get resurfaced all the time. It gets reinscribed all the time. Whether it is Prime Minister, whether it is Mantri, whether it is Mukhya Mantri, whether it is teacher, whether it is university professor, whether it is anyone, whether it is Babas or Buas or Bhikshus or anything. This logic of Shabda Pramanya is so enormous that it impacts, completely paralyzes your thinking and your mental abilities. Because you cannot think. I tell you a wonderful example. I had a conversation with my own brother who is an engineer who worked in PWD. And we were having a conversation on saving of water and all those things. He said, no, it requires so much of money. I said, is money important than saving a life? Or for that matter, how do you think in terms of planning and not? And then over a period of time, he changed his thinking. And I said, yes, what you were saying is very right. We need to have these kind of measures in the thing that it cannot be done. The problem with many of the people in the technical side in India that it cannot be done. Why it cannot be done? ऐसा उसमें क्या logic है कि वो it cannot be done? I mean, I will give you a day-to-day example. The Indian Railways has formulated the rule of superfast train, and many of you probably don't know. You are paying so much of money to travel in the so-called superfast train. What is the rule of the superfast train? Train maintaining average speed of 55 km per hour shall be designated as superfast train on Indian Railways. This is the rule. बाबा आदम के जमाने में. And how railway officials did everything super fast. You don't want to increase fare and all those things. You don't want to have. So what do? Trains such as Dadar Express, Nagpur Dadar Sevagram Express, you reduce its stoppages, the time halt. Previously, it was halting for 15 minutes, that you reduce to 5 minutes. Previously, it was halting for 30 minutes or 40 minutes at Bhusawal or in Igatpuri, you just reduced it to 8 minutes. That is how the timings have been cut down. And the train has been made as a super fast train. I mean, these are the ridiculous things which has been done over a period of time. Is there a thinking? Is there a new kind of a thinking and see how the system works and how really one can have that kind of a systemic overhauling? It requires to come out of your normative field of experiences. It also requires to come out of your normatives. Without coming out of your normative, you cannot really think otherwise. And therefore, I completely disagree with this logic of episteme as has been proposed by Foucault. I call it as normative. They are hindrances in creating not only enabling process, but also making transformations in the society, and also detrimental to the progressive thinking. So there is, I mean, there are so many things I can go on talking about the nitty-gritties of the postmodernism and the Buddhist logic and all those things, but I think I should stop here. I don't want to bombard with so many concepts in a one go. So I stop here, and I will be glad to address any question if you post. Thank you very much.